Welcome to the third episode of the Warrior Philosopher podcast. I'm joined by my good friend Brandon Williamson, and today this is a very exciting episode for me, given that I have covered Musashi previously a little bit, and he certainly is a figure in history that I definitely have a lot of passion for in terms of learning more about him. And we're going to be discussing a little bit of his life, and more specifically, the Book of Five Rings, which I think will be incredible. Like, last week, Brandon, you mentioned how the prince kind of fit in more to the warrior side of the warrior philosopher.
Yes.
This is 100%. I mean, of course, it's there's a lot of great philosophy in it too, but this is absolutely a book that every aspiring warrior, if you will, could gain a lot from.
Definitely.
In terms of reading. So, before we start, this a lot of this book is definitely geared towards an actual swordsman. Like a lot of the techniques you see, especially in the wind book.
Yes.
I found very little
wind and fire.
Yeah, especially fire, wind, especially the wind. I found very few things that you could really attribute to just a wide variety of things, but we'll still look at that and try to get as much information. But aside from the wind book, the fire book a little bit, there's still a lot of sort of broad ideas that you can attribute to lots of different things.
No, definitely, without a doubt.
Right. We're going to be going over a little bit of his life before we start talking about the Book of Five Rings. Brandon is I'd say you're a Bruce Lee enthusiast.
Definitely a Bruce Lee enthusiast.
Yeah, so he'll be talking a little bit about, because there are, when I was, you know more about Bruce Lee than I do, but as I was reading this again, I reread it again before we did the show, I did see a lot of parallels to a lot of the things that Bruce Lee talks about, and I haven't really read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do,
yes.
As extensively as you probably have, but from my memory of reading it and knowing what I know about Bruce Lee, there's so he definitely read this book.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. You can look at parallels within the Musashi's quotes about water, Musashi's quotes about having your way be no way.
Right.
These are all things that Bruce Lee went on to say as well.
Right. Just to go off of what you just said, I kind of put a few bookmarks on some of the quotes, and I believe this is it's still part of the ground book, or is it part of the introduction? It's still all right. So the ground book, right? If I could find the exact thing he said, there we go. With water as the basis, the spirit becomes like water. Water adopts the shape of its receptacle. It is sometimes a trickle, and sometimes a wild sea. That's almost...
Yes, almost exactly what Bruce Lee said.
Right.
So, basically what Musashi's saying here is let your spirit flow, right? And it's very similar to what Bruce Lee said, too. Bruce Lee said, let your spirit flow through its martial arts. Don't try to...
be rigid.
Yeah, don't try to be rigid. Don't try to put yourself in a specific form, but let yourself flow through what the natural situations may throw at you.
And it's funny that you mentioned that's very similar to Stoic ideology when we talk about flowing with the state of nature.
Yes.
And that's something that Musashi also brings up. I'm sure we'll get to that later on in the show. But just the idea of allowing yourself to be adaptable to any situation, or also adapt yourself, in this case, to any fighting style. Mm-hmm. He kind of revolutionized swordsmanship in Japan, where there were a lot of different schools that had very specific, rigid, ideas of how to train aspiring swordsmen, where his style was definitely very adaptable.
Yes.
But before we go on, I just want to go into a quick overview of the life of Miyamoto Musashi. So, it's widely believed that Miyamoto Musashi was born in 1584. He was the son of a... I wouldn't say lower ranking samurai, but not a lord, but just a kind of retainer of sorts, right? And throughout his early life, he was taught to be, a samurai, a swordsman. He received good education. He also, very early in his life, began to explore the world of samurai dueling.
Yes.
At the age of 13, it was widely known that he challenged an older samurai who, while not, he was not believed. So the samurai that he challenged at a young age, at the age of 13.
Which, real quick, I'm gonna interject here. This is age of 13, but 16th or 17th century Japanese ages. So really, this is 12 years old by Western age.
Pretty badass. So at the age of 12, 13, right? Miyamoto Musashi challenged a fully grown adult to a duel, and it was such like a crazy thing for him to do that his uncle was actually very against this, and he was actually on his way to apologize to the older swordsman on behalf of Musashi. And it's this might be a little bit of myth because there's definitely a lot of
Yes, Musashi didn't write about himself. Really, it was his students that wrote tales about him.
Right. So they may have exaggerated a bit, but the legend goes that as his uncle was about to apologize to the older swordsman, he charges in with a wooden sword, strikes between the eyes of the older swordsman, and beats him to death with a wooden sword at the age of 13. So obviously, we don't know the historical validity of this story, but I like to believe that's true because that is a pretty badass thing
Definitely
to comprehend. But going off of that, later in his life, it's believed that he fought during the Battle of Sekigahara, which was a turning point in Japan.
The establishment of the Tokugawa Shogunate.
Right. So basically, after the death of Oda Nobunaga, and then afterwards the death of, I believe, Hideyoshi.
Yes.
There was a power struggle in which I believe it was an alliance of samurai under Matsunari, I believe his name was. And I believe he was trying to put the heir of Hideyoshi in power, while Tokugawa Ieyasu, who was number 3 guy when Hideyoshi and Nobunaga were alive, wanted to place himself as the shogun. And unfortunately for Miyamoto Musashi, and this is if he participated, like you said,
yes, it's historians debate and say he may have not participated. Some say that he does, and some records by his followers, by his students, I believe one of which was his nephew, they say that he did participate. But some historians point to the fact that, or not, I don't know which facts they point to, but some historians are very adamant that he did not participate in this battle.
Right. So we're just kind of going based on what might have happened, but it is believed that he may have fought in the battle. But what is agreed upon is that if he did in fact fight in the battle, he did fight for Matsunari, the losing side. Now that battle was interesting, very even at first, but then one of the lords who had pledged his support to Matsunari actually defected to the side of Ieyasu.
Yes.
And Ieyasu, now some people argue the battle was already pretty much won at this point, but the story goes that Ieyasu, wanting this lord who was supposed to defect to his side to take action, aimed his cannons towards the mountainside, which this lord had prepared his troops, and fired upon him, non-lethally, just kind of, as a statement. And after this event took place, the lord charged down, and the Battle of Sekigahara was won. But either way, there's a lot of fictional depictions of Musashi's life, and a lot of them like to write as if Musashi had fought in the battle and was grievously injured. So we really don't know what happened, but if he did fight in this battle, he did fight for the losing side. And then it's also believed that later on, he fought in the Battle of Osaka Castle, or Siege of Osaka Castle. And again, we really don't know for sure, but this time he was on the side of the victor. But regardless of either of these battles, neither of them were battles in which he really gained any prestige or notoriety if he did fight in them.
Yeah.
It was predominantly through his duels that he sort of gained this renown. And he's actually considered to be a sword saint in Japan. I'm not quite sure what that concept really means, but just from that title, it sounds pretty prestigious. There, like we said, there's a lot of duels that we can go into. We're going to focus on the Book of Five Rings, which is, I would say, his main work. But just one more thing I'd like to bring up in terms of his dueling history. There was one famous duel where he was going to fight a swordsman who was specialized in the Nodachi style. The Nodachi.
The extra long sword.
Yes, really long sword.
Comparable to the Western version of a claymore.
Yeah, I would agree. It's two-handed.
Yeah, two-handed without a doubt. It could weigh up to 15 kilograms and oftentimes reach the blade length, not just the length of the blade and the tang and the handle as well, but just the blade itself would reach lengths up to 3 meters.
Right.
So.
And the Nodachi handle was also very big. It was almost like, it's just a weird kind of concept to think about. I can't really think, besides the Claymore, I can't think of another example. There are these, now, this is based on very hazy memory for me, but I do remember this sort of weapon used in the Balkans, I think during classical era against the Romans. It was sort of this long kind of, it was like a sword, but had a really long handle. I'm not sure if I'm just remembering it incorrectly, but anyway, that's not too important. This, his opponent was a master of the Nodachi style, and then I have a few notes up here. I'm trying to see if I can find his name. I don't think I compiled my notes quite perfectly to remember his name, but either way, a very relatively famous swordsman. This was considered to be a pretty important duel.
Yes.
It was scheduled to be on a little island in which you'd have to take a boat out to watch it, and it was actually closed off to the public officially, but
the public should have anyways.
Right. It's like if it would be like if they had Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov's fight and said, all right, only a few wealthy businessmen can come watch. Yeah, no, not gonna happen. And this was the place to be back then if you're interested in that sort of thing. Now, it's famous. Like we said, everything's kind of myth. I'm trying to think of the word. Like a lot of this could be myth, because obviously, like you said, it's the students and the people under his tutelage that want to make his story almost legend.
Yeah.
So we don't know the exact validity, but the story goes that he not overslept, but he slept well that day. His opponent had already made it to the to the island. He woke up, he took his time, got ready, had a nice long breakfast. Think of maybe you ever watched Troy?
Yes.
You remember how in the first battle Achilles he's sleeping with a couple of women in a tent when the little boy has to come and get him to fight that that big dude on the opposing side. Kind of like that, except a lot of people would believe that this was actually a planned strategy by Musashi. Some say it was planned, some say it was happenstance, but if you relate, because a lot of people believe Miyamoto Musashi read The Art of War. It would have made sense that he would have read it because it had been published way before his time,
as well as a lot of samurai had to read it.
Right, and a lot of their strategy and ideas of warfare obviously came from the Chinese.
Yes.
So it's very probable that he read it, and I do believe there's something to do. Maybe I'm mixing it up. I believe there's something to do in the Art of War of like making your enemy wait or something. I'm not sure if I'm remembering it correctly. But anyway, it was believed that it was a strategy to make his enemy wait and get frustrated, waiting for him to get there, having time to stress. It's like...
So, just for a little bit of background, he was supposed to take the ferry to leave to the island at what is about 8 a.m., right? They measured their hours differently. They measured it based on the... animals of the zodiac. So he left, I want to say, at the hour of the dragon is when he was supposed to leave, and that's about 8 a.m. But really, he ended up not even leaving until 2 to 3 hours later, because he woke up late, and then when people woke him up, instead of rushing off to go to the duel, he decided to take his time, eat a big breakfast, and get all ready for the day.
What a Chad. But yeah, so he took his time. And, I like to think of, like we both big fans of MMA. Mm-hmm. The first guy to go up, do the ring walk, right?
Yeah.
He's got like 4 or 5 minutes just to wait in the ring. I can imagine what that does mentally.
Yes.
In my amateur fight, there was like, they did not take any time. They just were trying to get people in and out of there. So I never really had to worry about that. I was in there and then my opponent was in there. Very simple, right? But in the UFC, you have like, good 5 minutes. Maybe a little shorter or longer.
Especially depending on who your opponent is.
Yeah.
If your opponent's Israel Adesanya,
he's going to have a whole dancer team. Right. But the idea is that, that I like to think is that the person who goes in first must have a little more time to kind of get nervous. And, I would believe that the advantage goes to the person who comes in second. But who knows? Either way, Musashi, having taken all this time, pissed the other swordsman off, the great Nodachi master. Now, another legend, see, there's so much legend when it comes to Musashi, right? Is that on his way to the duel, he carved out a sword from like a piece of wood sapling. I don't know if that's the right word.
Not from an
ore. That's what it was. Yes. Yeah, from an ore. And then, he ends up on this island. The other guy's pissed off, in a fit of rage. He comes at him, like no no caution. He threw caution to the wind, and then I believe
He also threw his scabbard into the ocean.
I believe that was a signal that they were going to fight to the death.
Yes,
right?
His opponent threw his scabbard into the ocean to show that the fight would not stop until the death. He would not be holstering his weapon. But to which Miyamoto Musashi told his opponent, "You must not be confident in yourself if you didn't think you're not going to use that scabbard again."
Fucking badass. Excuse my language. But and then with his improvised sword, I believe he used his improvised wooden or sword to strike his opponent down. No,
that's
the legend. The legend.
Legend. Yes, legend. So who knows? Maybe he used a wooden sword. Maybe he used his two swords. But
right.
Yes,
yeah, a lot of. I mean, I guess that's the thing with legend, right? It does sound badass for a guy to beat someone with a wooden sword. So while probably not true. Probably also not true that 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy beat a fully grown man with a wooden sword. We like to think that might be the thing. But anyway, yes, realistically, he probably used his two-sword method. But anyway, he did say, be adaptable. You know, so who knows? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make, he lived a pretty crazy life. He fought in numerous duels. I forget the exact number of duels that he's recounted to one, maybe like 60 or something
61,
like that?
I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Which the next closest duel winner is 32.
Right, yeah. First time he was the OG, and yeah, I mean, he still is. He's his legend has lasted throughout history. What other like swordsman, like samurai swordsman specifically, has this notoriety? I can't name one other like legit one. Like, hey, there's Rurouni Kenshin, but that guy's a cartoon character. I don't think I don't believe that's a historical figure. Pretty badass too. I'd like to see them fight. You know? Make that happen, Dana. But in his later life, he eventually came into the service of I believe a daimyo.
Yeah, if not a full on daimyo, at least a lord.
Right. From that point on, he still had a duel here. I think one or a few duels, but for the most part, this would be the time where he kind of developed his school, and the school's name, unless you know it on the top of my head.
Nito.
Right, which means
two swords, one style with two swords.
Yes, I believe, or one school too. It depends.
Yes, it depends. It doesn't. Either way, one school with two swords, because most of the other schools at the time focused on one sword, either the katana or, as we mentioned, the nodachi. Right, various different single sword methods, but. Miyamoto Musashi was very influential in that he pioneered the style of two swords, holding your katana with one hand and your wakizashi with the other hand, right? Because Musashi believed that you should use all of the resources at hand that you have presented to you, and that if you lose a duel having only used your katana or having only used an odachi, that you have essentially just wasted resources. You have wasted the opportunity to use your wakizashi.
In addition, he also talks about how, a long sword is good for distance, but if you're in a close space, obviously the short sword's going to have its advantages, and that, holding one sword with two hands kind of gets this sort of rigid type, like we're talking about, being adaptable. You're not as adaptable. Be light with both swords,
Yes.
And
he even goes into specifics into how you should hold the swords.
Right, which... Yeah, you can go into that if you want, but I don't think it's terribly important. But yeah, he goes into detail of, maybe one day when I'm bored and have time, I'll learn how to be a swordsman. But what was I going to mention about that? He, in terms of like swordsmanship, having there's like I hate to say it over and over again, but legend, right? But I do think he also writes about this in the book. Fighting multiple opponents, having two swords, obviously, is going to be a lot more effective.
Without a doubt.
Fighting multiple opponents, and he references fighting, 10 opponents at one time, even, right? So, the historical validity of him fighting multiple opponents, could very well be true. I just I have to do more research into the specific things that happen in his duels. I kind of been looking at this more from a broad, philosophical perspective. Anyhow. Going back to his life, just to finish it up, towards the end of his life, the very end of his life, after he's established himself as, a teacher of swordsmanship and a well-known figure in Japan, well-respected figure, it is famously said, and I do believe this, I don't think this is legend, because there's history to back this up, and he claims to do so himself. He moved into Regando, like a cave in Regando, which I believe was a mountain. Was that the name of the town or the mountain?
I thought it was a mountain.
He moved into the mountain. I'm trying to remember if Regando was the name of the town.
I think it's just a provincial name with do being the end of it.
Right. Either way, he moved into a cave, and there, living in relative isolation, is where he wrote many of his famous works. The Dakoto, which is we covered that before, the 21 Principles in the Path of Aloneness, and of course,
the Book of Five Rings.
Right. I was going to try to pronounce how do you pronounce that in Japanese?
Gorin no Sho.
Gorin no Sho. Nice. I remember you took a little bit of Japanese, so I was hoping you'd be of help with this. So glad to see that turned out well. Anyway, so in a cave, isolated, he writes the Book of Five Rings, and that's a pretty badass way to end your life because he died soon after that.
Yes, he died. He gave the books off to his chief student, which
wasn't it his adopted son too? I believe didn't he adopt him as a son?
Yes, something along the lines of that. They're definitely
the Japanese version related.
Of that. Yes. And then after doing that, died within a week. He had developed by this point in time in his life severe neuralgia, and was in lots of pain. And he died supposedly taking a knee, holding his sword in his right hand to prop himself up, and a cane in his other hand, and then died in that position.
I wonder if that actually happened. That'd be pretty badass, though.
Being a warrior, he probably at least died holding a sword. So
right. And you said, what was that medical term you used?
Neuralgia.
What does that mean?
It literally means nerve pain. So he essentially just had severe nerve pain to the point. Oh, actually, he didn't die of the neuralgia. He died of lung cancer, thoracic cancer.
He must have been smoking big doinks then. No.
But, however, he had been suffering for up until this point of time with severe neuralgia, which is it's just nerve pain, and it's literally the Greek roots neuros.
Okay, that makes sense.
Algia pain.
Right. I just wanted to clarify. I didn't know what that meant. Anywho, so yeah, pretty interesting life. Now, going into the Book of Five Rings, before we get into some of the specific stuff, I just want to start off in the introduction. I want to read the introduction really quick because this is the most, it's similar to the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. A lot of the most philosophical stuff, at least consistently happens really early on.
Yes.
So I just like to read part of the introduction.
The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which we will definitely cover one day because
absolutely.
It is one of my favorite books without a doubt. And is very similar to the Book of Five Rings. If you guys end up reading the Book of Five Rings, they both talk highly about their own schools, and a lot of the books are laying out techniques. However, as Patrick mentioned, a lot of it is, in the beginning at least, there's a lot of philosophical statements as well.
Right. I would say talk up their own school, because they do to an extent, right? But more, I feel like neither of them was
well, both of their schools were based on the fact that there is no way.
Right.
So, I mean, talking up their school in the sense that talking up the way of no way.
Right.
For both of them.
Anyway, so, introduction, Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi. I've been many years training in the way of strategy, called Niten
Ichiryu.
Niten Ichiryu. And now I think I will explain it in writing for the first time. It is now during the first 10 days of the 10th month in the 20th year of Kane, 1645. I have climbed Mountain Iwato of Higo in Kyushu to pay homage to heaven, pray to Kwannon, goddess of mercy in Buddhism, and kneel before Buddha. I am a warrior of Harima province, Shinmen Musashi no Kami Fujiwara no Genshin, age 60 years. How was that on pronunciation?
Pretty decent.
Okay, cool. Just finish this last part. From youth, my heart has been inclined towards the way of strategy. My first duel was when I was 13. I struck down a strategist of the Shinto school, one Arima Kihei. When I was 16, I struck down an able strategist, Tadashima Akiyama. And when I was 21, I went up to the capital and met all manner of strategists, never once failing to win in many contests. After that, I went from province to province, dueling with strategists of various schools, and not once failed to win, even though I had as many as 60 encounters. That was between the ages of 13 and 28 or 29. When I reached 30, I looked back on my past. The previous victories were not due to my having mastered strategy. Perhaps it was natural ability, or the order of heaven, or that the other school strategies were inferior. After that, I studied morning and evening, searching for the principle, and came to realize the way of strategy when I was 50. Since then, I have lived without following any particular way. Thus, with the virtue of strategy, I practice many arts and abilities, all things with no teacher. To write this book, I did not use the law of Buddha or the teachings of Confucius, neither old war chronicles nor books on martial tactics. I take up my brush to explain the true spirit of this Ichi school, as it is mirrored in the way of heaven and Kwanon. The time is the night of the 10th day of the 10th month, at the hour of the tiger. Now, he gets into the ground book, and within this, I think probably one of his most badass and best quotes is in this, which is, generally speaking, the way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death. Now, it's interesting. Whenever I go into Musashi, I really see how much of a stoic he was. Mm-hmm. You know, he's incredibly stoic in a lot of the things he talked about. Now, a lot of this is about strategy, knowledge of weapons, knowledge of the people under you, knowledge of yourself.
Yeah,
right,
without a doubt.
And if you could bring up really quick that quote that's very similar to Bruce Lee. On page 13, he says, "It is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others." And the Bruce Lee quote for that. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
No, I can't remember which one you're specifically talking about right now.
All right. I want to make sure I quote it properly, but he says something very similar to that, which is interesting, right? He says, to know yourself. All right, no, that's not the one I'm looking for. I guess maybe it is.
That's the...
Yeah, okay, that is the one I'm looking for.
Yeah.
All right, to know oneself is to study oneself in action with another person. Like, so many of these little quotes in the Book of Five Rings are incredibly similar to the things that Bruce Lee talks about, right? I always find that interesting. I like looking at these little things that they have that are similar. And like we mentioned earlier, mm-hmm. with the concept of water being adaptable, right? And then yourself being adaptable, right? Bruce Lee talks about that.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And then another thing too that I like to point out at this point is he mentions that he wrote this book without influence or without wanting his philosophy to influence Buddhism, Christianity, or other religions he talks about as well. As you read on into the book, he'll mention that he doesn't want it to influence other religions, and he doesn't want other religions to influence it. However, as you read some of his tenets, specifically within the Dokudo or the eight rules I believe he lays out in the Book of Water, perhaps, you can see how well they do flow with Christianity and just Judeo-Christian tenets.
It's interesting. I didn't think about that. So, going on, again, I like to mention his quotes. They're just incredibly... I just love them. So he talked in one of his other quotes is, "This is the truth. When you sacrifice your life, you must make the fullest use of your weaponry. It is false not to do so, and to die with a weapon yet undrawn." That's just, I love those little things he has to say. Basically, like, if you're fighting in battle, at least kill some of your enemies before you
yeah.
die. So badass.
Use all the resources that you've been given.
Right.
There's no point in just, not drawing your wakizashi, right? By the way, the wakizashi was your short sword. It was your more of like a utility sword, definitely much shorter than a katana. And by this point in time, all samurai carried a katana and a wakizashi. So when he's writing this, everybody that reads this book already carries two swords. He's just trying to not necessarily influence them, but they would all know what he's talking about when he mentions using two swords. It's not like they'd have to go and buy another sword.
Right. And going off of that, we talk about Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune. It's
Mhm.
basically winning by whatever means necessary, I would
Yeah.
say. Another quote to go with that by Musashi when talking about his school. He says, "In short, the way of the Ichi school is the spirit of winning, whatever the weapon and whatever its size." And I think that goes well with martial arts, for example. It's like
Yeah.
Bruce Lee would talk about it. No matter what martial art you're utilizing, you just
Mhm.
have to win the fight.
Yeah, definitely. Right. So, for those of you who didn't know about Bruce Lee wasn't just the the kung fu guy in kung fu movies. He pioneered. I wouldn't say completely pioneered mixed martial arts, but definitely pioneered.
He was a
pioneered-
great influence.
Yeah, definitely a great influence, and pioneered the popularization of mixed martial arts. So throughout a lot of we'll cover Bruce Lee more later. I don't want to get too in depth into it, but he was influential in mixing boxing and kickboxing and kung fu as well as grappling.
Right. Which was, at that time, the idea of fusing different martial arts was kind of, I don't want to say a taboo, but a lot of the traditional, like old school martial artists, especially the kind of people he would have been accustomed to in China, such as, Ip Man and other like these Wing Chun masters.
Yes.
Would have been unhappy with the idea of mixing martial
Oh,
arts.
definitely. That it was all school supremacy, just as it was in Miyamoto Musashi's time, right? School
Exactly.
supremacy, right? My school is better than yours. It teaches this one specific style. Bruce Lee comes in, and even if you watch Enter the Dragon, in the first few minutes, he has on
They're basically MMA
yeah,
gloves.
they're very crude MMA gloves. But he has on MMA gloves, and he finishes somebody with an armbar, I believe.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And going off of that, do you remember the story of I believe it was like a Shaolin monk or something like that, like some sort of kung fu monk that they were unhappy that Bruce Lee was teaching
Yes.
kung fu to like white Americans, so much so that they sent like a sort of this warrior monk to go challenge him. I forget his name, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I also forget his name, but that story is somewhat steeped in myth.
It's steeped in myth, but it did happen.
The fight did happen.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say
Who won.
Yeah, who
That's
won.
what's
It's
different.
hard to say what came out of
But
it. I believe they even made a movie about it a couple years ago.
Apparently it wasn't super good.
I remember watching it. It wasn't the best movie,
But the fight did happen. The monk came to challenge him because he was teaching kung fu to the white Americans in I believe he was in San Francisco at this point.
yes.
So he had moved already from Washington. So yeah, this monk came over and they fought, and it's not clear who won, but the fight did happen, and this kind of displays the idea of this it's deep tradition rooted in martial arts, the same like as you said, the deep tradition rooted in specific schools
Yes.
within swordsmanship in Musashi's time in Japan. Now, moving on to how we're relating this to martial arts, which I think there's so much to relate to it, especially the second time reading this. I read this for the first time a long time ago, and I'd say this is like my second or third time reading it. I see how much more you can attribute the things he says just to basic martial arts and not just swordsmanship.
Oh, yes, without a doubt.
Right here, this is talking about the benefit of weapons and strategy. He says, weapons should be hardy rather than decorative. It's the same with martial arts. You take a martial art like Aikido, which looks really cool, right? No doubt. Like, whoa, you can use your pinky to flip someone around. It's a decorative martial art.
I don't know. Have you seen those Steven Seagal movies?
Okay, come on. Don't play with me. No, Aikido's bullshit.
Yeah, right. And then coming from somebody, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, and even I can agree that especially when you get into the form side of it, just the
like the kata kind of stuff.
Yeah, the pumse in Korean, right? When you get into just that stuff, it's I'm not gonna low block, step punch, knife hand strike my way through an actual fight. Right. There are some things that you can take from every martial art, without a doubt, right? Like, you could take things from Aikido. If anybody listens to this,
than most things.
Yeah, if anybody listens to this and practices Aikido, we're not saying, I'm at least not saying that it's absolutely bullshit. I mean, you can take things from it. Just as you can take things from Taekwondo, you can take things from karate, right? So
I'd say you take more from Taekwondo than Aikido, but
I mean, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, you've taught me a lot of kicks that I may not use them in a Taekwondo way. Like, I use them from a different stance, but I'm still using the same kick. Like, especially the spinning back kick.
Yeah.
That's something that we kind of worked on a lot.
No, definitely, right? And then you see UFC, plenty of UFC fighters, even those that reach champion status, that have...
Conor McGregor's kicking style, I would say, is fundamentally a karate taekwondo base.
Yeah, no, definitely, without a doubt. His stance. You see people that have bases in karate with, Stephen Thompson, or people that have bases in taekwondo with Ben Henderson and Anthony Pettis. Yeah, right.
Even Silva.
Yeah, Silva, right? Or Machida for karate.
Right.
I can't really name anybody that has a basis in Aikido, so that is...
Let's... Oh, actually, Steven Seagal taught
Steven
Anderson
Seagal.
Silva, so
Yeah.
by definition... No. Sorry, I need a second. Yeah, Steven Seagal, I think... Was it the... I believe it was like the front snap to Vitor Belfort. Was that the one that Steven Seagal said, I taught Anderson that?
I actually have never heard that story that Steven Seagal said that.
There was some, I forget what, I think maybe it was that, but it was something like Steven Seagal was like, yeah, actually, before the fight, me and Anderson were working. I actually taught him that move. So, anyway.
Steven Seagal right now, who is so fat, he gets winded walking on set in his most recent movie.
Mm-hmm. And he gets hired by these Russian dudes or like these Slavic dudes, and he'll go to these conventions with like 300 of these young boys, and they're just watching him do these little stupid, fat old guy moves. Anyway,
back on the topic.
That's a decorative martial art, either way. Decorative weapon, right? Anyway, going on, he says, you should not have a favorite weapon. Oh, wait. There was more to that. Let me go back. Yes, you should not have a favorite weapon. To become over-familiar with one weapon is as much a fault as not knowing it sufficiently well.
Mm-hmm.
You should not copy others, but use weapons which you can handle properly. It is bad for commanders and troopers to have likes and dislikes. These are things you must learn thoroughly. So, without getting too much of a tangent, going back to martial arts, you should be prepared to not be too focused on a single martial art. You have to be well-rounded, work on, if you're an MMA fighter, work on your ground game, work on your striking.
Yes, without a doubt.
Right, and not have biases.
And then as well as if you fall into the fallacy of, I like this, right, and I'm going to try to use it as often as I can, then you become a predictable fighter, right? Or if you have dislikes, like, I don't like using this, I'm going to avoid it as often as I can. Now, this isn't to say, right, like, my strength is in striking, so I'm going to try to stay striking. It's more like, my strength is in my left hook, so I'm going to constantly only set up situations where I can throw a left hook, right? No, use your left hook if you have the chance, but don't
look for one technique.
Don't look to only set up that one technique.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because later on, he mentions there was a specific quote about not using one move too often. If I could just find it really quick, I wrote it down somewhere. I mean, we'll get there
eventually.
Yeah. He basically says something along the lines of, use one technique once, great. Use it twice, great. Don't use it a third time, Always keep mixing it up, because then your opponent will get used to it. They'll know that you're looking for that one technique. Then he also talks about timing and how the importance of timing, obviously very important, right? He talks about timing in the sense that you wait until your opponent's spirit is like flustered, right?
Yes.
You wait for the moments where they're disadvantaged, and that's when you strike. He also talks about, there's a specific word he used. It's passing on to. That's what it was. You pass on a temperament that you pretend to adopt a temperament. Like if you're relaxed, right?
Yeah.
You have this idea of, not being too focused on the fight. Then your opponent's going to start adopting that too. Like yawning. If I yawn, you'll yawn too, right?
Yeah.
Right. So he adopts this, sort of nice relaxed stance. And then as soon as the opponent relaxes, you're using timing because you're attacking him in that moment, right? So like a lot of these different concepts that relate to timing within
without a doubt.
Right. Now, going off of the idea of, like, we're talking about being relaxed in battle. Within the Water book, which I found, there's a lot of interesting stuff within the Water book. But he talks about the temperament you must have in battle and how you have to balance being calm but not reckless. Because if you're too calm and too relaxed, you're going to get caught in a fight or in life,
Yeah.
So he says, meet the situation without tenseness, yet not recklessly.
Yes.
Your spirit settled, yet unbiased. Even when your spirit is calm, do not let your body relax. And when your body is relaxed, do not let your spirit slacken. So, a sort of middle ground, if you will.
Yeah, and he refers to it as spiritual bearing, right? I think that's a good way to say it. He says your spirit shouldn't be too high or too low either. Right. So if you're, I'd say this is a relatively stoic tendency too. He's not
absolutely.
focusing on on emotions and stuff like that.
Being rational.
I believe is it in this chapter too where he where he talks about wisdom? Yes, polishing your wisdom. That is what he says here. So he asks that the follower, that the student have their spirit open and unconstricted and look at things from a high point of view in order to cultivate their wisdom and spirit, to polish their wisdom, right? To cultivate their wisdom and spirit, right? To not necessarily pride emotion or anything like that, but to polish their wisdom and to cultivate it. You know?
Right. That's a good one. I don't know if I want. Do you think we should read out the? I do find it interesting. I don't know how important it is, his stance. You know.
I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's important right now.
I'll just very briefly. He has this idea of a stance that you should adopt in just common life, which is the same stance that you should adopt in combat. Like always being ready to fight. Always being ready to battle your opponent if he should present himself.
Musashi was so always ready to fight that the myth goes that he never took a bath in his life.
Yeah, because he didn't want to be unarmed.
Yes, he didn't want to be caught naked and unarmed.
If you ever, I don't think you have, but I haven't like read it fully, but there's like a little comic, like a Japanese manga called Vagabond, which is about Musashi. And all the little comic strips, he's kind of dirty looking, unkempt, right? But the reason I want to bring up his stance really quick, I don't want to go too in depth about it. I noticed, and I've watched a lot of videos about this too. If you look at how Conor McGregor used to, like in his prime, and still kind of now, how he kind of approaches, like during press conferences or stare downs and stuff, the kind of stance he adopts is very similar to what Musashi talks about. And a lot of people made videos about it. It's kind of like, it's like that middle, like we talked about, not too high, not too low, kind of keeping your back straight, your chin tucked, that sort of thing, right? He talks about neither hanging down nor looking up, nor twisted. It's sort of this focused, composed, but prepared to strike stance. It's like, you ever see it like a predator before it's about to rush, right? It's kind of that, springboardy stance. So I found that interesting, and there's a lot of comparisons that I will make between Conor McGregor and the things Musashi teaches about, even though Conor McGregor's past his heyday, unfortunately. During the peak of success, he certainly had a lot of Musashi-like tendencies.
Oh, yeah.
Which is probably why he was successful, because he was less concerned with the material.
No.
Which is something that Musashi talks about. Don't be a materialist, guys.
Yes. Talks about it in the Dokudo, as well as I think he might get into it later here.
Yes. Another thing I like, the gaze and strategy. He talks about perception and sight. He says, perception is strong and sight weak. In strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close, and to take a distance view of close things. So I don't know exactly what he means, to be completely honest, but I do think I do have an idea of what he means. Perception and sight. It's easy to see something, but to really, understand is a totally different thing. I take a long time reading sometimes because I'll just kind of look through it, and I'll doze off and something. I probably have undiagnosed ADD, so perceiving, right? It's like I'm really understanding what I'm looking at. So and also, especially nowadays, I think people take a lot of things at face value. Mm-hmm. Like just look at the fact that majority of your aunts on Facebook or your friends that post articles, do you think they really read the article, or did they just look at the title?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like I deal with this on a daily basis with people that like they wanna like argue about something, like, look at this, look at this news thing. I'm like, all right, why don't we read this news thing? Oh, look, it's not quite what you thought it was.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The headline is meant to provoke emotion, so you open the article and you see the ads that are contained within. It's not the full article.
Right. So like cites the title, perceptions after reading the article. Like, okay, so that's what really happened, So I like that quote. So that I understand. What I didn't understand quite was the idea of distance things close things distance. I guess I kind of understand that. Like you have to change your perspective based on. I think that's kind of what it means, right?
Right. So he's saying, essentially, so he goes on to say like, don't focus on the opponent's hands because then you miss what their feet are doing, or so on and so forth, which is also another very Bruce Lee-esque thing to say. Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of goes along with that. Don't just focus on the distant things as distant, because then
they'll come up on you.
Yeah, right. or the close things as close, because then you fail to see the bigger picture.
Right. No, that was a good way of putting it. Yeah. So, okay, cool. We beat that little issue there. That's not too important.
Yeah.
See, there's like a little
like a lot of things are. So he
holding the long sword is what we're talking about.
Holding. Yeah, so a lot of things he mentions do apply to his martial art. Which if in the future when we go through the Tao Jeet Kune Do, like we're not going to be covering like
all the technique.
This
parts,
technique says to do this, right? And here are the diagrams.
He has like all those pictures of the little hand motion. I love looking at it for like a sort of just for fun, but
these are. Like, for example, holding the longsword, I'm not saying that there's nothing to take out of it, because when he so something important that we haven't brought up yet is in the ground book, he mentions that there's 4 ways to live life, right? Mm-hmm. And throughout the Book of Five Rings, he focuses on the way of strategy, or the way of the warrior, as he lived his life. But he mentions that there's also the way of the artisan and the way of the merchant, right? And what was the last one? The way of.
Did you already say the warrior gentleman?
The warrior. Oh yeah, is the
warrior gentleman?
The warrior gentleman. Okay, yeah. But anyways, and he mentions that he's writing this to focus mainly on the way of strategy. However, there are other paths to take that he mentions, right? And he kind of is trying to imply that this stuff and owning your craft can be taken to all these other things, whether your focus is not defeating men in combat as his focus is, but if your focus is to make money, or if your focus is to own your
defeat business rivals.
Yeah,
you don't cut their head off. You cut the head off their business.
Right. So I'm not saying that you can't analyze this and pull something out of it, but
when it comes to holding the longsword, unless you're gonna, you could be trying to be a swordsman.
You could look at the reasoning behind why he wants you to hold the longsword that way, and then apply it to other things, right? But anyways, so move on to bigger, better things.
The only thing I can get from that I think is good. He says, generally, I dislike fixedness in both longswords and hands. Fixedness means a dead hand. Pliability is a living hand. You must bear this in mind. That's like kind of going off of the be flexible.
Yeah, and be like water, right? Yeah. It's that whole thing.
Right. And he talks about footwork, which I do think has some interesting things concerning martial arts. He's talking about not being too light on your feet, but not being too heavy. Mm-hmm. Not having a real set footwork, because he talks about what if you end up in a situation where the terrain is like kind of rough, right? Like a marsh or a swamp. And to kind of have... He talks about having the same footwork that you have in daily life. The way you walk is the way you fight. It's almost like a stalking. Like you're moving forward, but you're not jerky, you're not hoppity, you're not light. It's like Conor McGregor when he was at his height. He'd kind of stalk his opponent. He wouldn't be incredibly light on his feet, but he'd be nice and balanced.
Yeah, so when I read that, I thought of it as almost a modern MMA style of bouncing, right? Like staying light on your feet like that. Mm-hmm. Especially because if you looked at martial arts of his time, right? If you look at very traditional karate or kendo specifically, right? The way that they move their feet is in a shuffling pattern, and then it's hard to describe with words. But it's basically
there's a lot of lightning, kind of quick strikes.
Yes, but
like charging forward, kind of.
Yeah, so there's that. But for the footwork, it was also it didn't look like the way that you walk normally or the way that you would naturally be. It didn't look like you're light on your feet. Your feet tended to be planted, and as you took a step forward, you brought your feet together, and then before shuffling the foot out, almost in like a ski-like motion. Again,
like
it's
a
hard.
Dance pattern.
Yeah, it's hard to describe in words, but it's definitely not your everyday walking.
Right. But footwork, very important. The way he describes footwork, kind of always being on the attack, not being he talks about not being in too defensive of a stance.
Oh, yes.
Stalking the opponent. It reminds me a lot about Conor McGregor's footwork early on. He would kind of stalk his opponent. He wouldn't be incredibly fast, but he kind of just cut off the ring, right? So footwork, very important for aspiring martial artist, of course. Can't really help you in the business realm with footwork, though, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The 5 attitudes, I don't think, are incredibly important.
Yeah, I read through the 5 attitudes, and I felt like it was a lot of old school martial arts terminology, right? Mm-hmm. So, what I mean by old school martial arts, right, is you had things were named specific things, right? So you have I don't know, like the Fist of Fury, right? Obviously, that's a Bruce Lee movie, but you had martial arts moves.
Good movie.
Yeah, you had martial arts moves or whatever techniques, whatever you want to call them, named things like that. And when I was going through the attitudes, I felt that's kind of similar to what he was going after.
Yeah,
he was going after just a martial arts strategy.
Right. In terms of the next things that I think are pretty important, going into the types of timing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He talks about, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier. So in terms of, I think, we can definitely compare this to regular martial arts. He talks about in one timing. It's kind of the idea. It's basically, if you just look at most of the things he talks about timing, it's all about situational stuff. It's all about, if this is a moment where the opponent is sort of relaxed, you take advantage, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to go too in depth on that, but just a lot, like I said, a lot of his timing is just based on responding to how your opponent is. Mm-hmm. If you have anything else you want to add to that, or
no, not too much on timing. No, not
for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of these things are very specific to swordsmanship, so we don't have to get too in depth. Especially when he talks about, I think when it comes to cutting and slashing, that sort of idea, I do think there is some. It's basically about decisiveness.
Yeah.
And that can apply to striking. Like, he talks about different kinds. Like a slash is almost like, how like when you're jabbing someone to kind of break their guard. Right, that's like a slash, I think, in his opinion, and then a stiff jab where you're really trying to hurt someone. That's a cut.
Yeah,
it's like decisive strikes are cuts, and then like strikes to open up your opponent are slashes.
Yeah,
in his to translate his concept with swordsmanship, right? So I think that applies to striking. A lot of this other stuff I don't think is incredibly important. Do you have anything you want to mention?
No, not at this point in time, really.
Okay, cool.
So actually, maybe so. One thing I thought was interesting is where is it on this page? 1 second. Oh yeah, when he talks about the to scold tut, this is kind of like, so if you guys watch modern martial arts, right? So like different martial arts have different terms from it, right? Like you have like some they almost always translate out to like power yell or something like that, right?
Oh, like a hi.
Yeah, like hi. It's even if it's just right, something like that as you strike. He brings that up. He mentions that with his to scold tut is the way that he calls it. As you thrust
the
up,
translation at least.
Yeah, no, that's what the translation says. As you thrust up, it's a tut, and as you cut, tut. Right. I just thought it was interesting. So that it's more of a modern type of power yell versus like the Koreans call it kiap or things like that. Where you.
Well, a lot of sports, I think, when there's a sort of striking motion, you wanna let out a little bit of air.
Yes.
I mean, even if you're just working out, it's like when you're just to make a simple thing, like if you're benching or squatting, as you're coming up, you're expelling some air.
Yes.
That kind of applies to a lot of different sports stuff, right? Although I'd say in striking, it has the dual effect of making a more precise. You need a little more power behind it.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that can be important. I don't think there's anything else to draw from these.
No,
not really.
Not really.
The next thing that I like, and I've sort of said this before in one of my in my analysis of the Dakota. So a lot of the things that come after this are relating to swordsmanship, but throughout the book, he's basically talking. He always kind of goes back to talking about the way. Stay on the way, study the way very profusely. He says, step by step, walk the 1,000-mile road. Now, the thing I wanted to quote: study strategy over the years and achieve the spirit of the warrior. Today is victory over yourself of yesterday. Tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. That's such a badass quote.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Right. Next, in order to beat more skillful men, train according to this book, and not allowing your heart to be swayed along a sidetrack. Even if you kill an enemy, if it is not based on what you have learned, it is not the true way.
Mm-hmm.
If you attain this way of victory, then you will be able to beat several tens of men. What remains is sword fighting ability, which you can attain in battle and duels. So he's basically saying, the skills will come, but the attitude towards learning is what's most important. And if you somehow win without, the use of your training, did you really win?
Yeah,
Luck
no. And this reminded me of a Patton quote, actually. When I was reading it, a Patton quote came to mind.
Interesting.
I believe it's Patton, at least. It was Patton who said, "Wars may be fought with weapons, but they are won by men. It is the spirit of these men that brings the victory." And that's really what he's saying, except for...
Yes,
Patton, cool. except for you swap out weapons for skills back then, right? But the spirit of the men stays the same, right? It is the spirit that wins it.
Yeah, attitude.
Attitude, spirit.
One thing that I thought of today when I was like just pondering things a little bit, I think, in terms of what we get offended about nowadays, I think it should be more that we become offended by bad attitudes than bad ideas necessarily. Because attitude is more important than... Because attitude breeds certain results, Like, I used to do speech and debate, and it wasn't the topic you got. It's how you approach the topic, right? So it's not necessarily the opinions of people that I will get mad about. It's if they have an attitude of not... For example, if they have an attitude that they don't want to... If they're wrong, they don't want to admit it. Yeah. Or they won't look at specific facts and evidence.
They won't look at other opinions to consider it.
That's an attitude, right?
Exactly.
It's not necessarily like oh my gosh. I have friends and a certain family that will they have very ingrained beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And it's not really the beliefs that they believe in, it's their attitude towards not wanting to expand their beliefs. Yeah. If that makes sense. They're just willing to kind of take everything at face value. Like if it's sad because most people's beliefs come from like just watching television or Twitter or social media, right? The titles of articles.
Yeah.
And that is an attitude, in my opinion. It's not really a belief. I don't think they really believe these things, but their attitude is that I'm going to look at something for a few seconds and then I'm going to base my beliefs on that. And that's a bad attitude.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Like he says, Musashi, he says, have no likes or dislikes. Always be able to adapt to different things. So that's just something I thought about today that I kind of remembered. But moving on... Firebook, not a lot there.
Yeah, really, Firebook was just a lot of it was just martial arts, which
war a little bit.
War a little bit as well. Which he actually mentioned that it would be like that in the ground book. In the ground book, he doesn't just talk about ground, but he also lays out what he's going to talk about in the other book. Since the ground book is supposed to be the foundation, the ground is the foundation, and he specifically says the Fire book is going to be mainly about his style and stuff like that.
Right. Going on to a few things in the Fire book that I like personally. I was talking earlier about the to pass on method, the idea of adopting a sort of mock temperament that you want your opponent to adopt too. Like if you want him to get relaxed, you'll relax a little bit. It's like sometimes if I'm getting tired and I'm sparring, I'll just kind of let low. Hopefully they do too, Yeah. We'll see what happens, but you kind of, and then after you lay low, they lay low, and then you attack again. Little things like that, right? You want to. He mentions yawning that I mentioned earlier. I think that's a great thing. The contagious yawning sort of thing, right? So you kind of want to give these people fake emotion, like give off fake emotions to get them to adopt those fake emotions that will be to their detriment further on in the battle.
Right? Oh yeah.
So he says what is known as getting someone drunk is similar to this. You can also infect the enemy with a bored, careless, or weak spirit. You must study this well. So that's interesting. I think that can be applied to martial arts, or just that can be applied to like business and politics too. Like it's almost like if you appear like you're not super focused, you might catch your opponents off guard because they think you're not focused. They slack off a bit, but really you're working hard. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So that can apply to a lot of things. Do you think this is important? The loss of balance. I guess that's important. Once that goes into the idea of situational attacks. You're attacking based, this goes into timing. When someone's off balance, you're using your timing, take the advantage, right? And then, like I mentioned the art of war before, there was a little thing he mentioned in the to frighten part that I remembered in the art of war. This I do believe was in the art of war for sure. He talks about in large-scale strategy, you can frighten the enemy not just by what you present to their eyes, but by shouting, by making a small force seem large. That's what I remember from the Art of War. I think he talks about, I forget the specific examples he gives. I feel like one of them might have been like lighting more fires in your camp or something like that. Was that one of them?
Yeah, things like that, right? So the whole basis of the Art of War, if you guys haven't read it, essentially, not the whole basis, but a large portion of the basis is to win the war without fighting the war. Right. So
it's a pretty short book too, if you want to read.
Oh yeah,
you'll get through that pretty quick.
Yeah, the Book of Five Rings, by the way, is only like 45 pages or so.
Yeah, my edit, they have bigger text, so it's 60 pages actually. But yeah, it's both of those books are pretty short, and I think Yeah, books like this, they're pretty sure pretty good because you can really get more in depth into it, you know.
And a lot of people fall into the fallacy with books like this that, like, oh my gosh, they're stating the absolute obvious, right? Like Sun Tzu a lot of times talks about, like, if you're gonna get defeated, don't fight the battle, right?
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, well, like, obviously, like that's a no-brainer, right? But I mean, if you look at it like that, that's the same as not having an open mind, right? Which we talked about earlier, right? There's plenty of things to take out of it and plenty of things to apply to it. The Bruce Lee quote that we said on pretty much every episode so far now. Is take what is useful, reject what is not, and add in what is purely your own. And I believe that if you like look at the whole thing and try to reject the whole thing as not useful, you're missing all the useful parts, right?
But even the most obvious things, like you take a concept like therapy. A lot of what therapy is just telling people what they already know, but they kind of forgot about.
Yeah.
Like delving into the subconscious. Like people know what happened that would, for example, create trauma, right? But sometimes it takes talking with someone to extract that trauma and deal with it. So I think just because you kind of quote unquote know something, it's like I don't know if you're familiar too much with rationalism and empiricism.
A little bit, not too much.
Basically, empiricism believes that everything, like all your knowledge, comes from experience, whereas rationalists believe that there's some things that are integrally part of you. Like you'll know them whether you were taught them or not, and then like the art of learning is almost like being retaught things you already know.
Okay.
Now, obviously, I think that there's, obviously rationalism and empiricism are both kind of, the reality is something more in the middle of both of them. But
yes.
Something to think about. Like sometimes you just have to be, you may quote unquote know it already, but maybe you don't know it in the verbiage that they use that makes it more easily applicable to your life, right? So, and that's the thing. People are like, oh, I know this already. Well, why are you here? If you knew it already, maybe you'd be a few stages up. Start using those things, right? So yeah, I agree. That sort of arrogant mindset is definitely to people's detriment. You should always be willing to learn and be willing to relearn. Like, I don't like to say I've read The Art of War because I need to reread it.
No, yeah, exactly.
Like, I'll mention things I remember from it, but I got to reread that book because it's been a long time, right? Anyway, but that specific thing, talking about small force seem large, straight out of The Art of War, like we said, he probably read it, so it's interesting. And like I said, especially if you look at more of the strategy aspects of the book, he definitely has ideas that you can kind of pull from The Art of War.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Right. So next, what was the next? All right, so we got that. Okay, that's the quote I wanted to mention. So, still on the Fire book, I believe, we talk about the concept of mingling, right? He says, what is meant by mingling is the spirit of advancing and becoming engaged with the enemy and not withdrawing even one step. You must understand this. Now, he's not saying never retreat, because he also brings up times when you need to retreat. I forget if I skipped. No, that is later. That's when he talks about to renew. That's saying when you're engaging someone, kind of keep them on the back foot. Basically what he's saying is dictate where the fight, where the duel, where the battle is going. Mm-hmm. That's what he means by don't take a back step. And that's just a little thing I wanted to mention. I found that interesting. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
No, I mean, that's pretty much it from Mingle, yeah.
Right. And then to crush, basically what I got from to crush is like, when you have your opponent in a disadvantaged situation, take full advantage to completely get them out of, like if you stun your opponent when you're fighting, martial arts, you take that ability to finish the fight.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Right?
So that's kind of, I think, what he meant by to crush. When your opponent is in a bad situation, if like you're fighting a war or battle and the enemy morale is low, you want to just finish them off, rout them from the field right then and there. Don't give them the ability to recover. Don't give them the ability to come back in the fight. Get rid of them right there. Crush them, right?
Yes.
So I think that's what it meant. You agree with that pretty much?
No,
right?
I agree with that, yeah.
Cool. We were talking earlier about not using one technique too much. That's the mountain sea change. Mm-hmm. He says, if it works once, good. It works twice, good. Don't do it a third time. So mix up your attacks. That's
specifically like you said, the two things that he uses are the mountain and the sea, right? You look at the mountains would be hitting hard, right? Think of what you think of when you think of the mountains, versus the sea is more of that slowly eroding force, right? Change up your style that way too, right? So, and I think this applies to more than just more than just martial arts
Yeah.
too, right? Like a good example of this is baseball. So you look at baseball, if you just swing for the fences every time, you're probably going to get struck out, right? Versus if you're more of a contact hitter, you're just trying to swing just to make contact with that ball, you're at least going to get a base hit, right? It's things like that.
Yeah. Or for you non-baseball fans like myself, football fans, hopefully we got a few of those. If you're always like trying to go downfield, you're playing verticals all the time, just trying to get like 30 yards every play, you're probably going to get 3 and outs most of the time.
Yeah.
So you got to run the ball, you got to get those quick slant passes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Slowly work your way down the field instead of just being predictable and, kind of like did you watch the Super Bowl where the Chiefs versus the Buccaneers?
No, I did not. I was busy actually that day,
Okay,
so
that's all
I was
right.
unable to.
I forgive you. Anyway, just something I was thinking about was that, because Buccaneers defense was playing incredibly well that day, Patrick Mahomes always had to go out to the pocket. So he's always making these same crazy throws, always being forced in that situation. I'm going to take that example out because that wasn't really his fault. His team played like trash. He played well. But anyway.
Even if you don't look at this from a warrior perspective, as I was saying earlier, taking it to the art of the merchant or the way of the merchant,
Right.
rather, right? This could be the same as diversification within your stock portfolio, right? If you only put your money into high risk, high reward stocks, I mean, the chances of you losing stuff is very much a lot higher. You
Don't
know,
remind me.
yeah. Versus if you only put your money into like government bonds
Or like the S&P 500.
or stable stuff. Well, I mean, the S&P 500 is slightly different, but only like put your money into stable stuff.
This S&P 500 is stable.
Yeah. I mean, but it's always going to grow. Okay. Anyways, that's for later. This is not an economics class, but like if you only put your money into government bonds, sure, maybe you're not really going to lose money, but you're also not going to hit the rewards that you would by having a diverse portfolio.
Studies show that the S&P 500.
No, I know. Exactly.
No. I'm not negating what you're saying. At a rate of about 11% per year, is actually higher than the average choice of like people just like. Obviously, some people are really good at the market and some people are really bad, so it's not accurate. But if you were to just if you're just the basis, like the median, right?
Yeah.
And you put all your money into the S&P 500, you'll make more money than the median, like, person who's trying to play the market.
Yeah, right.
But you won't make that much.
No, of course, the S&P 500 is always growing, but like...
Yeah.
Anyways, let's just go into on to the next thing. This is not an economics podcast.
We're talking about Miyamoto Musashi, greatest financial thinker of his time.
Yes.
Up there with Adam Smith.
Yeah, he was the 16th century Jordan Belfort, right?
Well, I don't know about that. Musashi was not a materialist.
No, that's very true, very true.
Yeah, he'd tell Margot Robbie to just, I'm not concerned with that. I'm going to stay in my cave and write my books, okay? Enjoy your little party. Anywho, and we're kind of getting towards the end of this. One other thing that I liked, just a little, I didn't quite understand this little concept here, but he was talking about how the penetrating the depths, right? I guess what that was is if you have to approach different ways of defeating your enemy. For example, you can't use the to crush method if your opponent's morale is high.
Yeah.
If they don't surrender, if they chose to fight to the death, you have to kill every last one of them. Like, there's different strategies for different situations.
Yeah.
Like, cavalry charges usually are used to rout lighter troops, right? Even if you have, like, light troops, but they're not going to rout you. Like, for example, you have to take into account if you're besieging a castle and their families are inside and they're in a fight to the death. Well, you can't use the same strategy you would if you were in an open field and you're just trying to get them to leave the field.
Yeah.
Things like that. And I think that's what he meant by that, because he said if the enemy... remains spirited, it is difficult to crush him. So, that kind of goes into that. Now, earlier when I mentioned the no one step back thing, there's also the concept of to renew, which means that if you're in a situation where you can't win, like kind of going in the art of war, right? You can retreat, Don't force the effort. There's situations where you're deadlocked with the enemy. No one's going to win. There's no point in spending more of your effort into trying to win that outcome.
And again, this applies to other things in life as well. You know, you can't...
Stock market. You got to sell eventually.
Yeah, right? So, don't fall into the sunken cost fallacy of, I've already committed myself.
Gambler,
I've already committed myself. I got to ride this I got to ride the ship until it sinks, I mean, at some point in time, you have to abandon the ship.
Right, poker. Yeah, know when to hold. Know when to walk away. Anyway, right. Beyond that, I mean, there's a few good things here. Commander knows his troops. That's you gotta know you gotta know the capabilities of those under you.
And as well as when he writes this, he talks about knowing the capabilities of your enemies, right?
Mm-hmm. And yourself.
Looking at your enemy's troops as your own,
right?
And trying to study them as much as you would study your own troops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of like know yourself to know others.
Yeah,
that sort of idea. Know others to know yourself. Goes both ways.
Yes.
So that's good. I don't feel like the rest of this chapter is too important.
No.
Like I said, a lot about swordsmanship. The Wind Book, again, really wasn't a whole lot that I got. It was literally talking about... The only thing I can get out of this is he's talking about the different types of sword schools and how they have very rigid styles, right? Mm-hmm. He talks about the ones that use extra long swords, ones that use strong long sword method, shorter long sword method. Basically, he's saying don't be tied into one style, one school.
Yes, no, definitely. But there's one thing that I did get for this, and I'm trying to look at the specific quote. But essentially, what he says is, here you go. Other schools make accomplishments their means of livelihood, growing flowers and decoratively coloring articles in order to sell them. This is definitely not the way of strategy. Just the next part, go into it. Yeah, I think it was this whole thing. Some of the world's strategists are concerned only with sword fencing and limit their training to flourishing the long sword and carriage of the body. But is dexterity alone sufficient to win? This is not the essence of the way. I've recorded the unsatisfactory point of other schools one by one in this book. You must teach these matters deeply to appreciate the benefit of Nito Ichi school. So, okay, essentially what he's saying here is the other schools only apply their teachings to one thing, right? And it's not just swordsmanship, right? But Musashi also teaches ways to live your life, ways to carry your life. And that is important as well, is essentially what he's saying from there. Also, at some point in here, he says something along the lines of, I don't want to search for the quote, so
maybe if you tell me, I might remember.
I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit here, but it's something along the lines of trying not straying as much from the way, trying to apply the way to more things in life than just swordsmanship, as well as focusing until you have mastered it. Now, maybe this wasn't in the Wind Book. Maybe this was in the Ground Book when he's talking about what he's going to cover in the Wind Book. So I'll search for that and get back to it. But in essence, yeah, that was really what I got out of that.
Right. Now, the final book, the Book of Void, I kind of was a little confused by that.
Oh, I really liked the Book of Void, actually.
All right, good. Maybe you can explain it better to me.
Yeah, so 1 second. I'm searching for the Wind Book. Okay, yeah. So, essentially, this is when he talks in the Ground Book about the Wind Book, he's covering other things that we have already covered up to this point, but I'm just going to reemphasize it. So, fourthly, the Wind Book. This book is not concerned with my Ichi school, but with other schools of strategy. By wind, I mean old traditions, present-day traditions, and family traditions of strategy. Thus, I clearly explain the strategies of the world. This is tradition. It is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others. To all ways there are sidetracks. If you study a way daily and your spirit diverges, you may think you are obeying a good way, but objectively it is not the true way. If you are following the true way and diverge a little, this later will become a large divergence. You must realize this. So yeah, this is what we were talking about earlier, but I'm just going to retouch on it. You have to look to apply things, right? So if you analyze this from a Western standpoint, right, and put this in with the schools of philosophy, right, you have to apply those things to your life in more ways than just one. That is essentially what he's saying there.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And he kind of, like you said, he touches up on that through different parts.
Yeah, throughout different parts of the book, right?
Now, the Book of Void, that idea of knowing that knowing nothingness and knowing the void and knowing that there's things that don't exist. I was a little bit confused with this. You said you liked it, so maybe you can get a little better insight onto. what he meant by this exactly.
So I think this was right before we started this podcast. Me and you were talking a little bit about that Socrates quote. They say I'm the wisest of all the Greeks because I alone know that I know nothing, right? Or
the more I learn, the less I know.
Yeah, things like that, right? So what he mentions is really he's talking about the fallacy of not understanding something and thinking that it is not true,
like perception
or
and
cannot
sight,
exist.
right?
Similar to
like
perception
sight versus
and sight.
perception.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Or kind of like the whole blind faith aspect, right? This would be the opposite of it. I can't see, so I'm not going to believe it. I'm just going to straight up read this chapter because it's rather short.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip things that are not relevant to this, but here we go. So what is called the spirit of the void is where there is nothingness. It is not included in man's knowledge. Of course, the void is nothingness. By knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist. That is the void. Right? So this is that's the first paragraph. So he's applying to, use your knowledge of what you do know to apply it to your knowledge of what you don't know. Continuing, people in this world look at things mistakenly and think that what they do not understand must be the void. This is not the true void. It is bewilderment. In the way of strategy, also, those who study as warriors think that whatever they cannot understand in their craft is the void. This is not the true void. So for those two paragraphs, right, so this podcast obviously has a large amount of Christian influence, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people don't believe in God, right? They don't understand, because they don't understand God, right? They don't understand the concept of life after death, the concept of original sin, from things going on like that, right? And because of that, they think that it can't be true. They don't take the time to look at it analytically and think deeper into it.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, if you don't mind me going on a quick tangent. There was a 13th century Jewish theologian named Maimonides. Mm-hmm. And have you heard about him?
No, I actually haven't.
Okay, so his basically the works that he had revolved around, it's really interesting whether you agree with this point of view or not. His idea behind religion and the necessity for things like the Bible, right? A lot of the things within the Bible, of course, sound very fantastical.
Yeah.
But it takes those sort of fantastical things that relate to human existence to be able to teach people about the complexity of God.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, even if you take, like, you know how we always call God the Father, for example?
Yeah.
If we think about God, the idea of God, there's not necessarily a gender relating to God. Or, there is the idea that it's, a family dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And we're the children of God, right? But just little things like that are to help people, like regular people, understand the concept of God without making it too complex. So we make a lot of these, we use human or language that most humans can relate to, rather than going too far into the complexity.
Right, and there's a lot of theological scholars too that look at the book of Revelations to see what, there's a whole school of it looking at the book of Revelations and analyzing it to see what's going on today and stuff like that. And a lot of those people say, well, if you look at the things that he saw, and he obviously lived in the second century or first century, first century, my bad.
Who did?
John in the book of Revelations, which may or may not have been the same John that we see earlier in the Bible. That's a point that a lot of theological scholars argue about. However, this John lived in either the first or second century. If he lived in the second century, it was rather the early second century. And he did not live in today's day, right? Mm-hmm. So if he was shown the future and he were to see things that... this isn't necessarily something I'm advocating for, and it's not something I'm disagreeing with either, but it's just a point I like to throw out there that some theological scholars like to argue about. If you lived in the double-digit years, right? Mm-hmm. And you saw a nuclear blast, how would you describe it? Would you describe it perhaps as a blinding light with a booming voice that sounded like 1,000 trumpets? If you saw attack helicopters storming, like modern version, like Heinz Apache helicopters flying in swarms, right, and in their squadrons at low altitudes across the desert, would you How would you describe it? You've never seen this before. Would you perhaps describe it as a locust that spits fire and it wears a golden helmet? Things like that, right? So I'm not advocating for this. I'm not saying that is definitely what happened.
Right, because there could be other explanations.
Yeah, there could be other
asteroid might have similar.
Right. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what I believe he saw either, but that's just something that people argue, right? So it applies to that. But anyways, to continue along in the Book of the Void. To attain the way of strategy as a warrior, you must study fully other martial arts and not deviate even a little from the way of the warrior. With your spirit settled, accumulate practice day by day, hour by hour, polish the twofold spirit, heart and mind, and sharpen the twofold gaze, perception and sight. When your spirit is not in the least clouded, when the clouds of bewilderment clear away, that is the true void. So essentially, by studying and by being introspective, right, both in martial arts and in other realms of the world, I like to believe, you can see what is true, right? And he goes on to say that actually this can be applied to other things. He says whether in Buddhism or in common sense, blah blah. Like he goes on to say that, right? But you have to study. You have to study both outwards and inwards and be introspective. Polish the twofold spirit of heart and mind, and sharpen the twofold gaze of perception and sight. And then, once you have come to inner realization, once your spirit is not in the least clouded, once you are no longer bewildered, that is when you can truly know what you do not know. I feel like
it's a good way of explaining it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's interesting too because we bring up rationalism and empiricism earlier.
Yeah.
And empiricism's like I said, neither is completely right. Obviously, we learn a lot through experience, but then there's some things that are kind of just part of us, right?
Yeah.
You take animals. Some animals can just are fully formed basically once they're born, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, humans are a lot different.
Yeah.
We're definitely more on the empiricist side of gaining experience, and that's how we gain knowledge. But then there's some things that I feel like are definitely that we're born with, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of things. And those things that we're born with, you know, the kind of rationalist perspective, you know, some things that we don't know about ourselves, right? That kind of, we may never really tap into. Or you take concepts that the human mind literally can't comprehend because we don't have the capabilities of doing so.
Exactly.
There's a lot of things like that. And I guess that's sort of what the void would be.
Yeah. And then in the unknown, in the void, is virtue and no evil. Right?
And that kind of goes into like, you talk about afterlife, right?
Yeah.
And like, virtue. If you just look at the concept of God, right? Essentially, and this exists throughout different kinds of religions, God's essentially good, and the personification of good.
Yeah.
Because, you know, without a personification of good, and evil even, right? Then you kind of lack a basis of morality. Like morality is always changing. And that's why, and I think at some point we'll be doing an episode on deontology and consequentialism. Deontology being certain acts are inherently bad or good, like murder, whereas consequentialism would talk about the outcome of a murder.
Yeah.
Decides whether it's good or bad, right? And the sort of nuances there, and that kind of brings light to how morality can be nuanced at times, and how it is important to have a basis, right? And not too strict a basis, but you still need foundations. Without foundations, then morality can be skewed to support a certain group of people that want to kind of use that to their advantage, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, hey, the consequences of these murders are good, so let's go kill these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Little things like that. So while you need foundations, deontology, you also need things that adapt to each situation. So it's a mixture of things. And then, so just going, that's kind of a little bit of a tangent, but the void, right? It's just that's the point that is good, virtuous.
Yeah. And I think like we've been talking about so far on this podcast, right? In all things, you have to look at both sides, right? From the whole Bruce Lee point to, as Miyamoto Musashi talks about, right? You having no likes or dislikes, right? Just really looking at deontology, consequentialism, from our first episode of Stoicism and Epicureanism, right?
And we didn't take Epicureanism at face value.
Yeah.
And we went into like
we went into modern Epicureanism.
Right, and we mentioned the positives of the original Epicurean.
Yes, we did mention the positives of the original Epicureanism. If you look at these opposing things, right, you can side with only one of them if you want, I guess, right? But then you're missing the beauty that the others have to offer.
At least learning about it, right?
Yeah.
You don't even have to agree, but you should know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like one thing I think is interesting, since we bring up religion a lot, we definitely have different perceptions of religion. I'd say you're more traditional when it comes to it. I'm more about I look at more of the messages behind things. But it's good that we have these two different perspectives because, we can explore it further.
Definitely.
And I guess just get a better grasp of our own beliefs. You should never I think you should never be in a room with someone that you completely agree with. Or not never be in a room, but you shouldn't seek to just surround yourself by people you completely agree with.
Right? Because again, as Musashi himself puts it, study fully the ways of all the other martial arts. Right. So even though he's teaching his school, somewhat advocating for his school, he does not want you to study only his school. Right? Mm-hmm. He wants you to study the other schools as well.
Right.
So because from there, that's where you gain knowledge. That's where you can know what you don't know. And also, B, that's how you can expand your worldview. Right? You can look at the other schools and make yourself better, both in the realms of martial arts, right? And in the realms of everything in life.
Yeah. One of the famous Musashi quotes, since we're getting to the end of this, it is difficult to understand the universe if you only study one planet. Mm-hmm. So, broaden your views towards things. Try to accept every single type of belief. I forget if we talked about this on a previous podcast or not, but I like to mention the idea of if I was a politician, for example, and I don't like the term politician or the concept, right? But let's say I was a politician. I would surround myself, personally, by people on the opposing political spectrum and constantly debate them, like hire someone, a professional debater, and just so I can better solidify my own beliefs and be able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Discuss them properly in a debate format when it's actually time to, like the real debates, the real competitions.
And that makes complete sense, right?
Right.
Own your skills.
Yeah. So study everything, take from everything, Bruce Lee quote, all the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Study Nietzsche, study Kant, study Copernicus, study Descartes, study David Hume. No, I'm not just trying to sound like an intellectual asshole. Just trying to study as much as you can.
Right.
We don't know a lot of things, and we should always be striving to learn.
Exactly, right? And then you'd be surprised at the amount of things you can look at that you used to believe were absolutely contradictory to your worldview. But they actually flow well with your worldview, and you can take things from them and apply them to your life.
Right. I used to think that one day I'd marry my celebrity crush. And then I turned 16, and Sophie Turner married Joe Jonas. So here we are. Anyway, shout out to Athena. She had a crush on Joe Jonas too.
Oh, did she?
So it was okay. It worked out. Anyway. So I think good episode today. Obviously, this is very different from the Prince. The Prince is a lot more complex. Mm. While the Book of Five Rings is complex, it's short, so you can...
Yeah.
It's easier to analyze, I'd say. Mm. Or not easier to analyze per se, but we can get through it quicker.
Oh, yeah.
And it's easier to organize, right? So I like that. It just felt like it had a nice format to it. But, since our most popular video so far has been the Dakota one, so hopefully you guys like this video too. Some future plans for the show. I'm planning on making a Discord server where we can get some discussions between everybody once, hopefully the channel gets a little bigger. I like the idea of being able to discuss things, so that's in the makings right now. Next week, unfortunately, Mr. Brandon Williamson will be taking care of some duties.
Yes. My wife gets back from Arizona next week. She's been there for a couple weeks for work. So I'm going to spend time with family over the weekend rather rather than the podcast. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so I'll either be going solo or trying to get one of our other intellectual friends to join in, our philosophical brothers.
Yes. But yeah, thank you guys for listening to today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you interact with the channel. Every way you interact helps us tremendously, and it helps other people hear the messages that we have. And I mean, if you enjoyed it, hopefully other people would enjoy it as well.
Indeed.
I just want to thank you guys, and yeah, just let us know what you think in the comments.
Right. Well, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. Thank you, guys.